It's great to be here.
Yeah. So what I'd like to start off with, first of all, is a little bit about your origin story when it comes to personal finance.
Yeah.
I know Stan Lee passed away recently from Marvel Comics, those of you who know, and the origin story is always something that people look forward to. So I'd love to hear your origin story for personal finance superhero.
I love the fact that you just started with Stan Lee because my wife's here in the back. You can take the camera out, say hi. This is my wife, Alicia.
Hi.
So I was explaining this yesterday morning how Stan Lee created all this.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea that one person did all what he did. So I mean, I'm holding up this book that I started my career. It's a book called Smart Women Finish Rich. It's dedicated to my grandma Rose Bach, and my origin of story is that I learned about money from my grandmother. So my grandmother was poor at 30.
Mm-hmm.
She lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She sold wigs at Gimbel's department store. And both my grandparents, my grandfather Jack and my grandma Rose, didn't have a college degree. And at 30, she was living paycheck to paycheck. And the origin of our family origin story is that my grandmother turned to my grandfather at 30 and said, "This isn't working." And he's like, "What do you mean this isn't working?" And she's like, "In case you haven't noticed, we're poor." And he's like, and he said, "Oh, I always joke with him, he goes, oh, you're overreacting." And she's like, "No, I'm not overreacting. Like, we're not making any progress." And so what my grandmother did that changed our family's life is that she turned to my grandfather and she said, "We're going to start saving 50 cents a week each." Literally, they saved $1 a week total. And she had a coffee can, like the old school coffee can. And they put that money in a coffee can, and she saved that money all year, that first year when she was 30. And she brown bagged her lunch, which is something that we all talk about again. But when my grandmother brown bagged her lunch, the story, the way it turned out is her friends all teased her. And they said that, you're cheap, Rose, come to lunch with us. And she knew why she was saving. So she went down to a brokerage firm at the end of the first year. She saved all that money. She walked into her first brokerage firm. She was not with my grandfather. She walked in by herself as a woman. This is way ahead of her time. And she met a man who said to her, "We don't open accounts for women. You have to come back with your husband."
Wow.
And she said, "There are 4 brokerage firms on the street, and if you don't want my money, I'll go next door."
Right.
And they turned around and said, "Well, why don't you sit down?" And so she opened that account. and the way the story turns out, she actually lost all that money that she invested the first year from the brokerage ideas she got. And so before we had this thing called the internet, she literally went out and started taking classes and finding money mentors and studied and read books and became a Wall Street Journal addict and learned how to invest over her lifetime. Mm-hmm. Became a self-made millionaire, passed the lesson on to my father, who became a financial advisor, taught myself, taught my sister. I bought my first stock at 7 because of my grandmother, McDonald's, favorite restaurant in the whole world at the time. And I grew up in a way naive because I thought my grandmother was normal. So I came to the investment business in 1994. And my father had been in the business for 25 years. And my dad built his business teaching. My father I'm from California. And my dad would do these financial education classes in the Bay Area. And that's how he would get clients. And I, as a kid, grew up going to his classes. Because at 9 years old, my mom said, one night a week I went off, and if you're going to teach this class, you're going to dress David up in a suit and tie and bring him to the class. And literally, that's what would happen. I would watch my dad teach. And so fast forward to 1994, I come to the business with my father. I'm sitting next to him in these meetings. And in the first meeting, the first 30 days of meetings, we had 3 clients die.
Wow.
And they were all men. And so I sat in 3 meetings over 30 days with widows. And in those meetings, I watched my father sit down with women and basically with these clients and be like, "Here's how you read your brokerage statement. Here's where the money's going to come from." And in the 3rd meeting, this woman turned to my father after she consoled him and said, "Marty, I don't understand any of this. Bill just told me that if anything happened to him, you would take care of me." And
It's a lot of pressure.
I was just, I still get chills when I say it, when I tell the story, and I've told the story many times, is that she walked out of the office, I closed the door, and I looked at my dad and said, what is going on in here? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I go, this is the third meeting I've sat in 30 days with widows, and you're teaching them how to write checks and how to read their brokerage statement. And he said, David, most women are not like your grandmother. She was not the norm.
Right.
So that moment led me to say, well, we should do something about this. Because all of you have had these moments that led you to what you do. And my moment was that. And I said, I'm going to teach a class for women and money. In 1994, I'm going to go teach a class for women and money. Everybody told me it was a stupid idea. They told me women wouldn't come and I shouldn't do it. I couldn't even get the local newspaper to respond to my request to run an ad.
Really?
And so I sent out an invitation. We had 225 women want to come to the first seminar. I taught that class. I went to the paper that wouldn't return my phone calls to run an ad and convinced the editor to come and bring a reporter to that seminar. And then they wrote a cover story for the local newspaper. And I just kept teaching that class over and over and over again. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I had a bigger mission, which was I wanted to teach a course. I wanted to reach 1 million women. I mean, and you know, for all of you guys in this room with huge dreams, I just literally told this story like 2 days ago. In 1996, I wrote down in a journal that my dream was going to be to write a book, this one, Smart Women Finish Rich, and teach 1 million women to be smarter with their money. And my mission was going to be teach 1 million women to be smart about money so they can protect themselves, protect their families, and teach their kids. And 30 days ago, this book came out for its 20th anniversary edition. And I'm proud to say this book has sold 1 million copies. And we've had 500,000 women go through the seminar. And I'm out 24 years later, still teaching it. And I was just sitting down with a friend of mine who helped me launch the seminars nationwide 15 years ago. And she's like, you're still, and I'm like, I'm going to this friend of mine's tonight to do this event. And she's like, man, you're still out there doing this. And I go, I know, because I still love it. I don't care. I care as much now as I cared 24 years ago. The crazy thing is like now, what I've been talking about for 24 years is like super like, everybody's talking about women and money all of a sudden. 24 years ago, people were like, women and money? My publisher, most publishers told me women would not buy a book for women and money. My publisher, Random House, said, if we think it's a great idea, and if it goes really well, you'll sell 30,000 copies. So 1 million copies later, and now we've got 7 million books out. And you know, kind of like going back to what you were talking about, Sandy, like I just listen to my community. Everybody thinks I'm like this really smart marketer. I'm like, you know how I got to be really smart at marketing? I just kept listening to my community. I was too dumb to know better. I put my personal email in the first book. So the first book, I put my personal AOL email. Don't use it because don't use it anymore. But I had David L. Bach at AOL.com. Sorry guys, I don't use that email anymore. But I started getting all these emails. And in the beginning, you get the emails where people are like, oh, you're great, thank you so much. And you love those emails. It's the ones that people are like asking you all these questions. Well, you didn't talk about this and you didn't talk about that. And very early on, I got frustrated by those emails, right? I was like, oh, that person's an idiot. Like I would think to myself, no, I did cover it, you're wrong. And then I started realizing like, clearly I didn't cover it. Clearly I didn't discuss what they needed to hear. And then I started realizing every time someone told me what their problem was, that was exactly what she was saying. Henry was saying, that was the next thing for me to teach. So my second book, Smart Couples Finish Rich, was because all these women were coming back to me and saying, this is amazing, but my husband won't do it with me. We're fighting over money. And I had many coming to me and saying, that book that you wrote for Women and Money is great, but I bought it for my wife and she won't read it. So like I had these two, and that's what led to Smart Couples. And okay. I've kind of just gone on this journey by listening to my readers and trying to solve the problems.
So as your audience has increased, how has listening to your audience changed and your engagement with your audience, and then measuring what kind of impact you have with them?
Wow, That's such a good question. Well, because everything's changed, right? Like, I mean, when I went out to see if there was a book, I'll put this all in perspective. And this is actually a broad-based age group in here. So who here remembers libraries and those cards in the libraries?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Because I've done a lot of younger groups and they don't have no idea what I'm talking about. When I went to look up books for women and money before I wrote mine, first I had to go to a library and look it up, right? And there was no internet to go look things up. So today, I mean, you know, because of what we do with social media and Facebook and all the stuff that we're on, the ability to get instant feedback is such a game changer. Like latte, if you go, hopefully you'll find it it wasn't syncing right on Amazon today, but The Latte Factor, which is my next book, which is coming out May 7th, 2019, went live today. The cover went live on Amazon to pre-order. So here's an example of how things have changed. Mm-hmm. In the old days, you would work on a cover and you would just like be in a room with a couple people in publishing and go, well, which cover should we use? And people debate internally, oh, we should use this one, we should use that one. I'm like, I'm gonna just ask my community. We sent out an email on the covers. The last 3 covers, I did not like the last 3 covers. This cover here, I didn't choose this cover. My community chose this cover. Like, huge over with the cover that I liked. The cover for The Latte Factor, not the if you go look at it on Amazon, not the cover I would have chose. Not the cover one of my kids wanted to choose. I think you liked the cover though, right? I'm trying to remember. Like, so, but we sent the cover out to our community, and we had 3,000 people vote on it in like 24 hours. And so the votes started coming back on Facebook and email, and it was 76% in favor of the cover we chose. So the cover I liked was like 11%. Well, it's not about me. So like that's a great example.
Right.
Now, I will say this, the book that I just put out, because it's important to listen to your community, but then it's also important to do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. I wanted to write this book. And I'll give you a great example. I've been wanting to do this book for 14 years. So I taught The Latte Factor on Oprah, had a huge impact, and I wanted to turn around and write this little parable story, a fable, like a Who Moved My Cheese book, that would reach the 99% of people who will never read a financial book. Most people will never read a book on finances. They just won't. Even though I've sold a bunch of them, there's 99% of people who won't. So I've been wanting to put into like a story, a book about money and hope and dreams. And Random House, no offense to Random House, because I love them, I've been with them my whole career, they didn't want to do the book. Year after year after year, they kept passing on it. And so finally I said, you know what? I'm going to just go write the book. I'm going to write the book that I want, the way I want it. I had the idea for 14 years. I worked on it for 2. And then I went out and I shopped the book. And I said, and we're going to sell it to the publisher that believes the most in the dream. Mm-hmm. And so
you found a publisher. So
it's Simon Schuster. Mm-hmm. It's not Random House. And, you know, I just think you have to, I so believe in what you were saying about monetization, and you have to follow your heart. My whole thing has been about following my heart, and I'm still following it. You know, and my wife listens to me about this stuff, and you know, somebody said, "Oh, does the stress go away?" I'm like, "No, the stress doesn't go away. It doesn't, because you want to this next book is for millennials. Well, it's millennials and baby boomers. Baby boomers to give to the millennials, and millennials to have hope for the future."
Okay.
So.
It sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, really looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So any final words for those of us who put out articles, books, and podcasts, just about connecting to their audience and growing that community and getting that feedback and asking them for feedback?
God, I don't even know. I think you have to love on your audience. Mm. You know, you have to love on them. I care so much. Like when I write these books, I care so much. When I go and do a podcast, I care so much. And still when I do my interviews, I care so much, right? So I think if you really care, people can tell, especially today, right? Like, you know, I just say that in this world of transparency where everybody sees what's real, like, you know, you can be a success for a year or two with if you get lucky. You can't have a career for decades if you don't deeply care. So I just think it's deeply caring, and then it's really also asking yourself, like, do you love it, what you're doing enough to want to do it for years? I see people come out and they'll come up to me with a book idea, right? And I'll say, hey, what do you think about that book idea? I go, it doesn't matter what I think. A question I have for you is, do you care enough to want to talk about it for years? And they go, I've had a lot of people go, no. Then I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't spend 2 years working on a book. Just a book's an example. I wouldn't spend 2 years working on a book and then another 2 or 3 years promoting it if you don't really love the message.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, I'm talking about the latte factor 20 years later because I deeply love and care about the fact that showing people that saving $5 to $10 a day can change their life. I'm almost teaching today verbatim what I taught 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I think it's important to have a timeless message. If you have a timeless philosophy, that's like, it's important that you just do what is you. I always say, like, bloggers, podcasters, YouTubers, just do you. Don't try and like look at what somebody else is doing and try to do them. Just do you. If you go back to like being authentic, if you just do you, then the people that like what you have to say will keep tuning in.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic message, and I know that everybody here really cares about what they're doing and really feels it deep inside, and that's why we're all here today. So thank you for being here today and
You're
deeply
welcome.
caring.
You're welcome. Do we want to open it up for questions?
We can do a couple of questions if anybody has. I don't know if you have a microphone to pass around or not.
If you can just repeat.
We'll repeat the question, sure.
I just want to say that I read your book when I was 21 years old, The Automatic Millionaire.
Yeah.
And it completely shifted my mentality on creating wealth for myself and my family. I'm immigrant and first generation in this country, so my family's not used to saving money, investing money. So when I read that book, it completely changed my life. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Wow, awesome, thank you. Well, how about I give you this book?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. That's so cool. That's my favorite, I don't know, that's probably one of my favorite books.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
So there are a lot of different platforms you can use to get your message out these days, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Which do you find are effective at getting your message out, and which do you tend to use the most?
Wow, that's a good question too.
So the question was, what social media tools and other types of communication to get the message out?
So I'm going to tell. Let me go back to the very beginning here. Probably the most important thing I did in my career early was build an email list. And it's funny because I hear people talk about this like today, like it's the Holy Grail. Like it's all about the email list. It was about the email list 20 years ago too. So the reason I was able to put out 11 consecutive national best-selling books is because I've very early on built a community. I called it the Finish Rich community. I captured emails, and then I would talk to them, and then I would add value to them. And so when I would put a book out, I could be like, I'm putting a book out, and then people go and buy it. And so I've been building that community for 20 years. It's gotten harder. It's gotten harder to get your emails through, but at least with your email list, you own it, right? Like, so I've been I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter, and but that's even harder, right? Because you don't control the platform. So you can build these huge communities, and then all of a sudden the algorithm changes, and then you got to pay a bunch of money to get anybody to see your stuff. So I would say that email for me has been number one. And then I got to tell you, like, I do a lot of the old school stuff called working. Working, which is, you're showing up and you're doing the work. And whether it's a small room with a group of like this size with 30 people, or it's a room with thousands of people, it's showing up over and over and over again and doing the work. It can be a live event, it can be a mingling thing, it's doing media. I've had 489 media appearances in the last 11 months. Not that I'm keeping track. I can tell you that's had 11 billion impressions. Like people, and by the way, if you go to davidbach.com, you just want to see how much media we've done. We archive it all. So when you look at all that media, I had to go do it all. In addition to the fact that I'm a co-founder of a registered investment advisory firm, and I have a family and 2 little kids, and I've got a personal life. So it's a lot of stuff. And it's funny because I'll tell you one thing that it just came from a marketing meeting at Simon & Schuster. And I had like 12 people in the room. And we were talking about what it's going to take to get this book. I don't just want it to be a bestseller, I want it to be a phenomenon. This is my book that I want to go globally all over the world. My hope for the Latte Factor is it's going to be a book that will translate into 35 languages, and it can sell millions and millions of copies to reach people all over the world. And so we're talking about like typically people will go, what's the one thing to do? And I made a comment in this room of all these veteran people. At Simon & Schuster, I go, I got asked what's the one thing. I go, my experience is there's never one thing. It's a lot of everything. And the whole room went like this because they know it's everything. We don't have, the one thing we don't have anymore is that holy grail of Oprah. Because that was the one thing. Oprah, we miss you. That was the one thing. But there's no one thing anymore. And even back then, it was like that was the one thing. But you still took 10,000 things to get to that one thing. So I think if I could give any experience sharing from 24 years of doing this, it all matters. And so you got to put your heart into all of it. Because you don't know what the one thing is that you put your heart into, that all of a sudden people are going to see and be like, oh, what was that? And then the next thing you know, especially today, things can just take off online.
Yeah, there's almost no way to predict it.
There's almost no way to predict it. Yeah. Now they start asking questions.
Well, and you've obviously feel very passionately about this new book, and you mentioned you've been wanting to write it for 14 years. So what was your tipping point where you're like, this is it, I'm taking a stand now, this is how I'm going to do it?
Well,
so the question was, you've been thinking about writing the book for 14 years. What was the tipping point that made you decide that right now was the time?
God, that is a really good question. I think it's a multitude of things. One is that I didn't want to keep talking about this with my wife and not do it. I mean, literally, I think she's had to hear me talk about this book for 9 years. My kids have been hearing me talk about it, and I'm not somebody who talks about things and doesn't get it done. What happened was there kept being other books. And the other thing I will say is this. I've never written a book to just write a book. So my whole thing was, unless the book's got to come out of me, then I'm not writing it. So I didn't actually have the full story. This is a storybook, and I didn't have the story. And what happened is that I took a sabbatical. In 2012, I made a decision, thanks to my wife. She asked me, what do I want for my birthday? And I said, I want a year off. And she said, what do you mean? There's a whole story behind that. But I said, I don't want to work anymore. And so I took 18 months off. I stopped working from the January of 2013 to June of 2000, am I doing this right? 2014. And
That's not even the funny part.
and but all by taking that break, I got all this creative energy back. And it's funny because I just watched somebody who, I don't even know who she is, but she's apparently huge on YouTube, and she stopped running her podcast. She stopped doing her YouTube thing today. And made all this news because she's this huge person on YouTube with 20 million people. I can't even tell you her name. But she stopped doing it because she's like, I'm burnt out. And I need to get my creative energy back. You guys probably know who I'm talking about, right? Do you? Okay. So what's her name?
Lily Singh.
Lily Singh, yes. So I watched 6 minutes of Lily Singh tell everybody she's going to stop, right? And I totally got it because I was like, I didn't know I was burnt out, but when I stopped working and took a break, then all this creative energy came back. And that's where the Latte Factor, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I have the story. And so I did this with a co-author, the first time I've ever done this with a co-author, with a guy named John David Mann. John David Mann wrote a great book called The Go-Giver. And I had talked to John David Mann about doing this book 12 years ago. And all of a sudden, when I had this creative energy back, I'm like, John, I know I talked to you about this a decade ago, but I have the idea now. And you got to fly up to New York, and I'm going to take you on the journey and walk you through this story. And so it came to me.
Thank you.
That's great.
You're welcome.
Okay, one more question.
All right, so kind of related, but to piggyback off of the question about like growing your email list. First is like, what have you found to be the most effective way to do that, especially as you were scaling? So like, was it an opt-in or a freebie or something like that, or some other piece of value that you were offering people to then get their email address? And the other thing is, what pivotal moments in your career would you say were of the empire that now is David Bach? I think all of us would love to have a career that spans decades and be successful authors and
Yeah.
speakers and all those types of things. I'm just wondering if you could pinpoint like just a couple of places where you either made critical decisions or hired other people to help you scale or things like that.
So the question, there were two questions, and
They're related.
it was a complex question there. So
It would have been good to end on a simple one, right?
no, that's great. So the questions were about techniques for building the email list, and then any critical decisions
Yeah.
that helped the longevity of the empire, basically.
So let me tell you what I didn't do right. All right, so let me start with what I didn't do right. We did so many seminars for so long and we didn't collect emails, which is just still to this day painful. But we pretty early on had an opt-in box before it was like the opt-in box, right? Like we had that opt-in box at the top of the website very early on. We used to have it that it was an audio. You know, I did an audio way back before there were podcasts, and you would put in your email and we'd send you a link to an audio. And over the years, we've had different things, PDFs, worksheets. As the opt-in box has become more what I would call like, everybody's trying to do this bribery thing to get your email. I've actually started going the other way, which is like, you know, I do a newsletter like when I feel inspirational, and if you want to get it, like it's free, but like put in your email. Like, so I have mixed emotions. I want to bribe less. Like, we're going through a process right now about cleaning out our list, because everybody goes through this thing too, right? Where if people don't open up your emails, you have to be cleaning out your list. And I literally just had this conversation with my team because, you know, all the marketing people are like, well, you have to have all these things to make people re-engage. And I said, so I wrote this whole, I write my copy, like my emails. And I wrote an email today and I basically said, so nobody thinks I should do this on my team. Like you guys can, well, you won't, let's say you can opt into my email and you'll see this. So if you go to davidbach.com, you can put in your, you know, I have this newsletter we send out. It's called 3 Minute Sunday, but you won't get it because you'll be active. So the people who aren't active, if you're in my database and you haven't been active, there's going to be an email that's going to go out. And what I just worked on today was an email that basically said, everybody told me I need to bribe you to like re-engage, and like I just don't feel like doing that. So like if you want to keep getting great information from me when I put it out, then let me know you want to stay on the list, kind of thing. So again, going back to just trying to be as authentic as I can. But I got sidetracked. So the email opt-in, it's been over different times. And then the next question was like, what's the one thing that helped with scaling? And I hate to say it, but there hasn't been one thing. It's been a multitude of things. Partnerships, licensing agreements, vision. I've always, for better or for worse, been focused on better or worse. I'm very similar to like, I did not set out to monetize. I have monetized, I've made money at this point. I'm sure I could have made a lot more. I have always been crusade focused. And to a fault, you know, where I have a crusade and then I go and spend a bunch of money to get the crusade out. I just let my wife know that I was not going to make any money on this book that's coming out. She's like, how is that possible? I was like, and I started breaking down how much money we're going to spend to get the message of the latte factor out. And she was like, oh, really? but no, I mean, but I'm also like, do I think if it all works out, it'll make money at the end? Yeah, I do. Like, I'm a financial person. So, and I do care about things like ROI, but I am a crusader to a fault. And I totally have believed over 25 years that people say if you build it, they will come. I don't know if that's true. I just know that I care about what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. and the money actually has, almost verbatim what you said, the money has followed. Now, sometimes it doesn't follow instantly. I can tell you something, Smart Women Finish Rich and Smart Couples Finish Rich, both of those books were bestsellers. And the first 3 years, my tax returns were negative. There were losses on my tax returns. And one of the things I would tell people is I had a day job. My day job was I was at Morgan Stanley as a financial advisor. So I had 2 jobs. I'm writing books, I'm traveling all over America on my dime to do every single college radio show and media tour possible, staying at every Motel 6, taking 2 flights when it was cheaper than 1 flight, and spending every single dime and then 2 more to pay for my marketing costs, because the publisher doesn't pay for that. And my wife, she'd look at tax returns, she'd be like, what's this negative sign? And I'd be like, that's the book business. So you've been gone half the year and that actually loses money? People think this is all super glamorous. Let me tell you, there are elements that can be glamorous, but the other thing is, man, that's why you gotta love this. There are lots of ways to make a living. And I'm sure you guys all do love this or you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks a lot, David.
You guys, thank you.